All right, so final testing day is here. If you can't tell, I'm really excited. I've been looking forward to putting the JT on a dyno ever since really I had the idea of this concept for this video. So we've had the parts since February. Today is the day. We are heading to SpeedTech Performance in Fort Worth, Texas to put the JT on the dyno. So looking forward to the results. Let's get out of here and let's go. All right, so we're here in Fort Worth. We have finished our mileage on the S&B. I did want to just quickly take a second to explain how we're doing our mileage. So we filled up the JT all the way to the first click. Basically let it run until it clicks. And then from there, I've tracked all the mileage, every trip, and I've signified whether it was in-town driving or highway driving. So I've done it to about 250 miles on the OEM. This one, I think we hit right under that, 244 miles. I've got everything logged. But what we're gonna do, once this hits the first click, we're gonna take a picture of exactly the amount of mileage the amount of gallons that we put into the JT, and then we'll do the division to get a true miles per gallon. So I did want to just show that on how we're measuring our miles per gallon. We're not taking it off the dash, off the truck. We're being very specific. So I did want to just quickly share that. And so now we're in Fort Worth. After this, we'll head to SpeedTech. All right, so we got 16.89. We'll take that and we'll divide that by our mileage, our miles driven, and we'll have our miles per gallon.
SpeedTech. All right. Got the full squad here. They don't make too many shops like this anymore. Come in here, the smell of the old school shop. Look at that. Look at that SS. That's where it's at right there. So you know you're getting the real deal when you come to SpeedTech. So we just talked to JR. We're gonna get the Jeep up on the dyno and get started. All right, we'll walk into the garage here and watch them hook it up, kind of see how this goes. Immediately just badass cars everywhere. Look at that. Makes me wonder, do I have the wrong job? Look at that. Yeah. Just got through running the JT on the dyno test. We're a little bit backwards because we do have the S&B intake on rather than the factory first. That was because I was finishing up my mileage test for the fuel. So anyways, we want to talk about the dyno. I'm not the expert, JR is. One thing I do want to note though, so if you're watching this, you probably know the JT stock, what they claim is 285 horsepower. That's not to the wheel, that's just 285 horsepower. And it's an automatic, which impacts the dyno readings. So I was just gonna ask JR to kind of explain some of the things that he explained to me as far as what the dyno reads, what is a loss. So if I tell you that the JT has 285 horsepower and then we tell you the results are 200, so that you kind of understand how we get to that number. So JR, can you kind of just talk about the process and what it's reading and what's potentially lost from, you know, the stock numbers that you see associated with vehicles to the actual test.
Yeah. No, everybody gets hung up on the number, and that's good and all, but we use it more as a tuning tool as well and stuff, you know, to start your benchmark and see where your gains are at.
Right.
And, you know, also it's not, a lot of people look at just the peak horsepower number. You know, that's not everything. You're not up at peak all the time. You got to look at how the torque and stuff is doing down lower RPM, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. But yeah, when they rate the horsepower from factory, that's normally done at the flywheel, oftentimes with no accessories, no water pump, no alternator, power steering, all that stuff. So each of those things take energy to turn and stuff.
Right.
So with an automatic, you're normally going to have somewhere around 20 to maybe 25% loss through the drivetrain to the wheels. Okay. Stick shift maybe 15% or so. But anyhow, like on your graphs here, we're looking at the horsepower and the torque. And then this down here is the air-fuel ratio.
Okay.
And we can look at it based off of speed or off of engine RPM here. So we're typically starting the runs at around 3,000 RPM.
Okay.
And put it to the floor and come up through red line here. So we expand that down. You can kind of see this is going to be your torque right here is always, you know, flatter and will tend to come down, and then your horsepower is always rising. So it looks like, you know, on this it's recording the graph about 3,700 RPM, but about 5,200 this thing really starts to want to climb up more. Just going off of this here.
Yeah.
Then this is your air-fuel ratio here, which is a little bit lean. And then this would be fatter. More the closer to the ground is richer as you get down here. More fuel than air.
Yeah.
So some of this, where they start richening that up, is likely in the computer stuff or whatever of it's adding some more fuel, whether it's heat getting built up or just the settings.
The computer's telling it too. Yeah.
So
And
where with different tuning you can modify that and get more power and stuff.
Okay. And I know that was another factor, just with this vehicle specifically, but any newer vehicle, is you've got the miles per hour speed limiter, which affects, you know, how far you can push it on the dyno before it cuts itself off too.
Right.
Which I think we're guessing it's probably at 100 miles an hour on this Jeep. Not 100% sure.
Looks like you're about 85 here on this run anyhow that stopped, but
Yeah, I think
he did say he tried it in a first gear in another.
Yeah, he said he tried to get into fifth, and it kept trying to kick downshift, so he thought it might be getting close to that 100.
So a lot of the factory settings, you know, they're going to have for safety stuff. Hey, this car shuts off at 98 or 102 miles an hour or whatever. You know, even standing still here, you know, you're like on those runs, you're at 85 miles an hour. Some cars go up to 200 miles an hour.
So if we had to benchmark this, so what we're going to do next is we're going to pull the S&B intake off. We're going to put the factory back on. We're going to run it again. If we really wanted to look side by side just from a horsepower and a torque, what would you say the results of the horsepower number and the torque number we would be comparing the next one to?
You mean as far as taking off the stock airbox the SB or whatever and putting the factory back on?
Yeah, so I mean, based on these tests, so we're going to pull it off and we're going to run it again. If we were doing, and I know you said a lot of people get caught up on the numbers, and this is for our YouTube channel, so we want to show a number, you know, picking a number to say, okay, the torque it appears to be 205.
Yeah, what we'll do is after we do those runs, maybe we do 2 runs with it off, and we can lay them up here and compare them. And just like from this run to this run, you're going to see some little differences here.
Yeah.
You know, this second run here, it shows like it's down a little bit, and the motor may be just a little heat soaked or whatever as well too. So by the time you put your stock one on and the motor cools down, it's going to be a little happier. Then we'll do a second one, and we'll line them up here.
Take a look. Okay.
Yeah, and we'll see the exact gains. You know, I don't know for sure on this Jeep, but a lot of the factory air intakes aren't super efficient. They have a lot of baffles in them and stuff, help keep it quiet, whatnot. So if the motor wants some more air, it's going to respond well to that, you know, what you have.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to find out.
It will, and that's the one thing that I do want to kind of note for the audience too. So what we're really set out to do is, in the Jeep community, there's always this big question of cold air intakes don't do anything for a Jeep, and exhaust don't do anything. And while I understand, and this is not something that's designed for performance, not that type of performance, but the goal was really to provide facts.
Right.
Does it do anything literally, or does it not? And if it doesn't, that's okay. We all know, right? So we're doing a little myth busting. So really, my expectation and my understanding with the Dyno is that with the cold air intake, it could be so nominal in the variations on testing that you may not see it. Because, you know, if you're talking 5 horsepower, you could have that in between different runs, right? Sure. So, yeah, with that said, let's go ahead and we'll pull this one off with the OEM and we'll let it.
Yeah, we'll find out.
All right. Thank you, JR. Appreciate it. All right, so we have the OEM factory intake back in, so we're getting ready for the second run here.
So the motor's all cold and stuff right now, but it actually made significant more power right now.
Okay.
Wow.
So we'll do another.
I'll probably run it for a few, like a minute or so. Let it
get a little
hot.
heat built up,
And then,
because see that one, it made about. That's this red run here.
yeah,
It made 10 more horsepower over the whole.
the first
so
two.
even if we go,
That's interesting.
yeah. Now it's cooled down a bit too.
That's 1-to-1, the first run versus first run?
The first pull on with the old intake, and then just now.
So this one would have been cooler too, right? Because that was the first one.
Yeah.
Now we did drive from Irving, but we also, I mean, it's probably a good 10, 15 minutes.
Right.
You know.
And this is your air fuel. It all looks about the same, but that's the same gear and everything. Yeah.
Hey, look, we're just looking to find the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's what it is.
It actually, I mean, right now, you know, we got the fan on and stuff, but actually on that run we didn't have the fan on there. But going down the road,
Yeah, it wasn't on the first one
oh,
either.
it wasn't either. Okay. Going down the freeway at 70 miles an hour may be a little bit different because you're getting more air rushing.
Yeah.
Also, you know, being cooled down for me switching out the intakes, the timing is added more because the intake temperature is colder.
The computer changes that.
Yeah.
Oh,
When it's hotter, it starts pulling timing away, which takes power out.
We'll try another hit here and see what.
yeah, see what it does.
Just do it back to back, and then we'll maybe do one more if you want.
Do two in a row.
Yeah.
We'll keep it heated
Yeah.
up.
Well, it's fairly consistent. It kind of, you know, he did basically 3 pulls, right, all right there. I mean, the dyno doesn't really lie.
Yeah.
So it made more power right now.
So it made more than the first run.
Yeah.
230.
Yeah. There's your first. There's you know, the third 3 runs in a row should be plenty heat soaked, no fan, nothing. And you know, so the red is it. Blue is the first run. Red's here. I mean, that's through the whole RPM range.
Consistently higher.
Yeah.
There you go.
So even like on this big gap right here, 17 horsepower difference. 17 more horsepower with the stock airbox.
Wow.
It's kind of crazy.
That is, I mean,
at that peak, that's the biggest spread. So you know, it's less here, and then 16 foot-pounds of torque.
Wow.
less.
Yeah. So the stock setup made 17 more horsepower and 16 foot-pounds of torque. Wow. Kind of like we talked about on the Hellcat. When I see that, it makes me think like the factory tune is pretty optimized for what's there. If you change that, put the cold air and maybe had some kind of a tune change where, so now it's flowing more air, maybe it needs a little more fuel or whatever, to where it's optimized with the cold air, then you might see the numbers come up.
Yeah.
But
So what's
on May 4th, 2020,
Yeah.
that's what we got right there. I mean,
what's interesting is, so S&B does not promote a horsepower gain.
okay.
They
Okay.
say that it's going to run, I think it's 18% more air and efficiency that the air intake will pull through to measure. But I mean, like you said, this part doesn't lie.
Yep.
And I mean, for a Jeep, that's a significant amount of horsepower loss because it doesn't have a ton.
Percentage-wise, yeah.
So, now, to your point, if you put an exhaust on it and then you tune it for those things, sure.
You probably start getting more power overall with the exhaust and some tuning.
Yeah.
Assuming, some of the manufacturers have stuff pretty conservative to help with warranty and stuff like that. Most vehicles, with tuning, you can squeeze a little more power out.
Yeah. And for me, the goal was not really to get more horsepower. I mean, it'd be great, but it was to see, is it going to make my vehicle run cooler, more efficient, easier on it, have a little cool sound, and be good with it.
It'd be interesting, like how if there's gas mileage changes or anything like that,
Yeah.
Again, we talked about the sound earlier and the feel earlier, what makes you happy when you're sitting in the seat. So, but there's your myth busting.
Yeah.
Now, on other cars, there are definitely, we do a lot of cold airs and stuff.
Oh,
so
yeah.
you take like a new Chevy truck and put a cold air, you're going to see power increase. Yeah.
Yeah.
But this being stock, maybe after the exhaust is on, maybe tuning, definitely if you have a supercharger on it or something,
right.
where it has a more demand, that could be worth it.
Yeah. So in your opinion, the ad that I was talking about that makes those cows true working cows, where it opens them up and it actually locks right down on the box, so it pulls more air into the box. Do you think that would make an impact on horsepower?
Possibly, and going down the road or so, where it's getting that air,
in a garage closed in.
Yeah, you may feel it, and then again, it's an accessory people may like or whatever, it's just something different, neat, unique.
Well, that's what I wanted. I mean, the sound can be a mind trick, right? You hear the sound, and so people will swear it's got more power.
Right.
And I think you tend to use your foot a little more when you hear the sound. So you're like, okay, press the gas a little more. So your potential fuel mileage gain, you kind of lose maybe because you're having a little more fun. But as long as you enjoy driving your vehicle,
yeah, that's what's important. As long as you're happy with what you have and you're having fun out there, that's what all this is about.
yeah, absolutely. But today was about myth busting. So guys, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This was fun.
You're welcome.
All right, guys, now that we are done with the day 2 testing, let's go through the day 2 results. Let's take a look at the fuel mileage results. I know that on the way to the dyno testing, I kind of described how we were taking, or how we were doing those tests. So I won't go through that again, but what you're looking at here is the total miles driven, both with the OEM and the S&B intakes on. So I try to get them to as close as possible to each other. There's 251 miles on the OEM compared to 244. But if you look at the split, it's still an 80-20 split, 20% in town, 80% on the highway. And then obviously you can see the gallons difference there, which was in the video measured. That's how we put the mileage, the gallons in at the gas station. So the end result was that the OEM outperformed the S&B by 0.8 miles per gallon, which in my opinion is insignificant and negligible. So I mean, I think you could say that really running the either one, you're basically going to get the same results. I think if you're looking plus or minus 1 mile per gallon, there's really no difference. So for this, again, the way that I tested it, I didn't hyper fuel. I didn't set one single path to measure it, which if you did those two things, I think you would probably get a maybe a more accurate measurement, but at the same time, I don't think it's a realistic measurement because most people don't drive, don't hyperfuel. For me, again, I just wanted to say realistically, as long as they were the same type of mileage, meaning highway or in town, and I drive the way that I drive, what's the result? And so what I found is that it was insignificant. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at the dyno results. And again, for all of my data nerds out there, I did want to give you all of the data for you to look at. We won't walk through every data point, obviously, but if you desire, you can pause the video, really take an in-depth look at the graphs and some of the data points I'm going to give you moving forward. So I did want to give you the conditions of the dyno testing. I know that's important and can have an impact on the results. Now let's take a look at the first graph here in data points. So you're looking at run 1, which in both scenarios, the engine would have been the coolest. So from the time that we drove there and they had time to hook up all the machines, get everything ready, the engine had time to cool down. And then in between the first 3 runs with the S&B, we put a fan on. The fan was only on during the intake change. It was not on during any of the runs of either intake. So that didn't impact it, but we did turn it on in the middle to cool the engine down, to give me the ability to change out the intakes and cool the engine off. So that being said, run 1 to run 1 would be when the engine was the coolest. Run 3 to run 3 would be when the engine was the hottest. So I do think that those are apples to apples comparisons. All right, so kind of shifting here to the chart. If you can see here on the left side of the chart, you've got the horsepower on the vertical axis. On the horizontal axis, you've got the RPMs. The red line represents the OEM intake, and the blue line represents the S&B intake. We've got the numbers charted down below for all of the RPM levels. So you can take a deeper look at that when you have time if you'd like. Same thing with the torque. So you can look here and you can see the torque. You can see the chart. And what I would point out to you on both of these, you'll automatically recognize if you just kind of take a quick glance that on both the horsepower and the torque, for the consistency of the graph, the red line, which is the OEM, is higher than the S&B. So it outperformed it in the first run. But we're going to take a little bit deeper look into how it actually outperformed it. So looking at the run 1 takeaways, on the horsepower side, it was on average for that RPM range that I'm showing you just a second ago, it was 10 horsepower higher on average than the S&B. The largest spread at any RPM difference was 19 horsepower higher with the OEM. The max horsepower with the OEM was 227 horsepower at 6,200 RPMs, and then the max for the S&B was 8 horsepower lower at 219 horsepower at 6,100 4,800 RPMs. And then shifting down to the torque is similar results on the OEM. On average, it was 10 foot-pounds higher than the S&B. The largest spread there was 18 foot-pounds at 5,400 RPMs. The max torque on the OEM was 198 foot-pounds at 4,900 RPMs. And then the max torque on the S&B was 189 foot-pounds. So again, really, the takeaway there is really at every level, the OEM outperformed the S&B run 1 to run 1. So again, that was the coolest run of both. If you heard JR kind of in the video, he did mention, hey, these results could vary out on the open highway. So that's definitely a possibility. I want to expand on that a little bit, but before we do, let's go ahead and look at the run 3 comparison. So looking really same format, looking here at the horsepower comparison, again, what you'll notice is that the red is on top of the blue in the chart. Again, outperforming, the OEM is outperforming the S&B. You'll see this one, just to go ahead and address this, so if anyone has any questions, the RPM start point of these data points versus the run 1 to run 1 is different. So here we're starting at 4,800, where before we were starting at 4,400 RPMs. And the reason for that is if you really look at the chart as to where they start to kind of get close and then run consistently, when I was looking at the data points, the spread from the earlier RPM levels on the run 3 to run 3 really skewed the average and made it seem even higher, the horsepower and torque average higher. And I just didn't feel like it was relevant. I think if you look at the chart even visually, you can kind of see as they get spooled up together where that gap starts to be pretty consistent is around that 4,800 RPMs. And so I started there so that the numbers weren't really skewed. All right, so here's a look at the torque comparison. Again, same thing as the first chart. And as you would expect, if the horsepower on the previous was higher from the OEM, then you would expect the torque to be the same. But again, I wanted to give you the data. So again, looking at the takeaways, run 3 to run 3, it's similar to what we saw before on run 1. Although as the engine was hotter, which this is a little interesting to me, the OEM's performance on the horsepower was actually 12.5 on average horsepower higher than the S&B. The largest spread was 18 horsepower, which is pretty consistent. I think that's just 1 horsepower less than it was on the first run. And then the max horsepower for the OEM's 226 compared to S&B at 217. OEM torque, so the torque notes, the OEM was on average 12 foot-pounds higher than the S&B. The largest spread was 17 foot-pounds at 5,600 RPMs. And the max torque on the OEM was 194 compared to 186 foot-pounds with the S&B. So again, really the takeaway here is that on the dyno this day with the temperatures and the humidity that we had, the OEM hands down outperformed the S&B. And so what I was saying earlier is that, you know, JR did mention that it is a possibility that out in the open road where cooler air could be pulled in, more air could be pulled from rather than on the dyno in the garage, the results could be different. My belief is that although that is probably true, I don't know that you could ever expect an outcome better than equal to the OEM. Meaning, in my opinion, I'm not sure that out on the open road you would be able to flip a 10 to 12 horsepower deficit to a positive. It seems like to me at best case scenario you might be even. Now I could be wrong. Again, I'm not an expert at this. As I mentioned to you guys before, this is my first experience with the dyno. But what really the goal here was to set out to say, what will a cold air intake really do? If you haven't seen part 1, check out part 1, but quickly, part 1 did show that on average, and this is out on the open highway, that the S&B did cool the air on average 4.5 degrees cooler. So keep in mind that's in Texas in May. So although that may not seem significant, if it were to be able to maintain that percentage of a gap there in August when it's a lot hotter, that could be significant. And then obviously the noise factor was minimal, and if you're putting on a cold air intake, you're looking to gain that noise. So but then here in part two, when what everybody really cares about and asks about is, am I going to pick up any fuel economy, and am I going to pick up just a little bit of horsepower? And the answer in my case is no, based on my test results. Now, just because I think that it needs to, I need to put it out there. I did reach out to S&B, obviously respectfully, and just kind of asked. I shared with them the results. I just wanted their feedback because they are a reputable, respectable company. They put out great products. As you saw really if you did see part one with the install, the products are quality. It fits in great. It sounds great. And again, they don't promise any horsepower gains or fuel economy. They promise efficiency, and I think that really the fact that it did pull in cooler air consistently, I feel like what they're saying their product will do, it does. I think it's just the notion that a lot of people expect some horsepower gain and potentially better fuel economy. And in this case, for the JT, for my JT and my testing, it didn't. So again, my whole point really in saying that is that S&B did, they asked about the dyno conditions. They asked, did I make sure I left the battery disconnected for 2 hours after the install? They mentioned there's a lot of factors that could have attributed to these results, which is all true. But at the end of the day, my opinion is best case scenario, it's equal to the OEM. One other thing I do want to mention that was brought up to me as I released part one was, well, I had somebody say, I believe that the filtration quality from an S&B, or really not S&B, but aftermarket versus the OEM is inferior. And I don't know. I don't know how to test that at home quickly. I guess, you could run a full cycle of one or the other, and then you could look at them. But I think that would be a little bit subjective. So I can't answer that. Didn't set out to answer that, but it's definitely a factor when you're considering, do you want an intake? And then the second piece too that a lot of people bring up is, hey, save your money, right? Save your money, spend it on something else. Well, to me, again, that's subjective. Somebody may have $100,000 budget for their Jeep, and somebody may have $1,000. So again, I kind of just fall back to my belief on that is it's your Jeep. Spend your money the way you want to. If you want an intake and you like the way it sounds, and in my opinion, it is convenient to be able to change the filter. It looks cool. There are a lot of things and it's your $300. Do it, right? If you see this and you say, hey, look, for $300, I'm just getting a little bit of sound and maybe a little bit cooler air here and there, and it's just not worth it. Awesome. Really my goal is just to share with you what I've learned. And hopefully it helps you make a decision one way or the other. So I appreciate you watching. We've got one last thing to do, and then we'll shut this down. Let's go to the JT and let me show you what I'm going to do. Am I going to keep the S&B or am I going with the OEM? Let's find out. All right, guys, it's time for the big reveal. All right, so as you can see, I'm sticking with the OEM. If you like this video and you found it helpful, please like it and subscribe to the channel. I appreciate all the support from everyone that's already supported the channel. Next video, we will be lifting the JT, so stay tuned for that. Take care, everybody.